Hello, hello. It's Friday, 2 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. That means that you get to chill with Jordan Chu. Hey, Jordan. What's up?
Hey everyone.
Myself, Noah Lerner, and today we're exceptionally excited to welcome Dale McGeorge, the founder of Jepto. When we started our automation hangout in, I guess it was late February, George and I talked almost, jeepers, Dale and I talked super early, and we've been planning this world domination since then. So it's been a long time coming, and schedules finally sync, and I'm really, really stoked for this one. Um, Dale, I don't know that there's going to be tons of people in our space that are super familiar with you or know a ton about Jepto. I think a lot of people in the SEO land, especially people who do local SEO, have heard of your connector for Data Studio. Can you tell us a little bit about you and tell us a little bit about your company?
Sure. So I'm fairly new to the marketing industry. So my background, I did a Bachelor of Computer Science straight out of high school, and then did what everyone that does a computer science degree does and joined the military. I did that for 10 years, spent 10 years in the Special Forces, and then decided that was enough for me and I would get out and go back to my roots in IT. So I started an agency with my twin brother. We did marketing and software and web design. And then we did that for a few years and I ran the marketing team there. And then my love of software sort of kicked in and I said, yep, let's get out and leave the agency side and start a software company focusing on the problems that we discovered, during that agency time. So Jepto as a company sort of formed mid last year. We basically took the idea of automation and marketing intelligence and thought, there's probably a gap here for some of the stuff. There's a million different dashboarding tools out there, but nothing that really sort of solved the problems that we were looking at. So we, in our research, we built a Data Studio connector for Google My Business, which seems to be fairly popular. It's totally free. We decided that we were doing things a little bit differently in that regard, and it had some great feedback on that. And then obviously it gave us an opportunity to start to talk to agencies about their problems, and just continued to develop Jepto, which is really aimed at marketing agencies to help them scale across the portfolio and make their life a little bit easier.
And where are you now? My understanding is that you're still in beta mode, right?
Correct. So
A lot of functionality coming.
we've only just really soft released. We are still building out the first few features. So we've released two so far. So KPI management, which is our machine learning, predictive forecasting, and budget tracking, which is we think just a bit more modern way of tracking advertising spend than a Google Sheet. And we're currently in the process of building our anomaly detection feature. And we should have all features sort of baseline out sort of by September. But really keen to hear what people think about what we've built so far and the direction that we're going.
I've found it to be super cool. I think most people who have watched this podcast know that we feature really cool software products. And just in case anyone has concerns about how ethical we are in terms of how we behave, anything that we feature, we're not getting paid or free anything from any of these software tools. We subscribe to them either with free trials, or we also pay subscriptions so that we're just totally ethical about it. And we only feature stuff that we think is super cool that's going to help agencies make more money. This is really neat. I think the automation stuff that you have coming down the pipe is really cool. I love your Slack integration now from an alerting perspective. That to me is something that I'm using every day, watching how one of the KPIs that I'm tracking for one of my clients is rolling. I think it's really neat. Jordan, you're using it too, right?
Yes, I'm using it right now to make sure we keep on track with the KPIs that we set month over month, and it's been great so far.
I think
I've been loving it.
the burn down in terms of ad spend is incredibly useful as well. I think that's a key feature. And I know, Dale, I'm making you uncomfortable because we didn't want to talk about your tool too much. but can you let us know how you got started with automation and talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I guess my sort of background in process and from the military side, and then really trying to dig down to what would make ourselves more efficient. I had a lot of challenges within the agency as we were starting to grow around a growing client base, and then a lack of consolidation as to how things were being done, and just wasting time on administration and not giving value back to the customer. At the end of the day, we were a services company at the time, and so selling our time meant that every minute that we were spending on that client, if it wasn't billable, was kind of wasted. So this particular slide sort of goes over the way that we set up the company and the different pillars in which people were responsible. I was personally responsible for the collection and objective pillars, and so my main role there was looking at, from a daily operational perspective, what is the team aware of that other people are working on for their same client. So we had channel specialists like most agencies do. So some focused on SEO, some focused on SEM or social, but there was a lack of cohesion across the board. So when we started using teamwork.com as a project management tool, we sort of saw the capability of their API and their webhooks that they provided. And so we had a few web developers internal to the company, and we just said, look, this is probably a good opportunity to automate some of the manual tasks. And I really got excited by what we could achieve by applying a bit of process automation and what that meant for the team on their day-to-day basis. So our first sort of foray into that daily automation was to automate the task closing and filing process within Teamwork. So we had basically the goal of having every client having a separate project within Teamwork, and then we used a time tracking system that everyone would log their time, but in the way that Teamwork works is there's a board view, which you're looking at now. All of the time logs for every client was then put into the one project, so you couldn't pull that out for analysis. So what we wanted to achieve was a single view for everyone for work that's currently in progress, but then once work had been finished, we wanted to push that task over to the individual client project, so then we could then analyze all of that data within the client project. So slightly off topic, but we built a data studio connector for Teamwork as well, where we pulled out the data from Teamwork to then display internally as well as to the client. They could see all of that data about what's going on, what's in progress, without us having to actually do anything else. And that's kind of where I fell into love with Data Studio and what its capability was and the direction that Google was taking it. And then, yeah, on the automation side, I just thought it was fun. It was cool to play with. It did have an effect, obviously, but I enjoyed it more than anything. So if I use this one as a quick example to walk through, I guess the main objective here is that closed column is, and we stopped this system where we had a naming convention across the board, and we basically just had a script that ran that said, look for this TLA. Everyone loves acronyms, so we made our own 3-letter acronym. And then so that code of the client then matched another TLA within the project, and then it found the right project. And then we even had the opportunity to look at the tags, and the tags made the task move to a specific task list. And then we built a Slack notification if something was dropped in the closed column and didn't have the appropriate mechanisms to be able to file it away. We would kind of name and shame the individual to say, hey, you need to fix up that task before it can be filed away.
So did you make your own Slack bot?
Yeah, that one's just a webhook. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Ooh. Okay.
And,
So I wish we could see this live because it blew. You showed us this in March, right? You showed us the live.
yeah. So I'm no longer involved.
Oh yeah.
With,
I'm not saying
with
just show now.
yeah.
But it's like if they could see it work live, it's kind of mind blowing. So
Yeah, it's instant, which is cool.
you were talking about the challenges associated with tracking time. Can you give us a visual for that with this board view? I mean, is it just like they were clicking the time icon and then opening when that pops up? Like I don't do a ton in board view. I'm almost always in the task list view myself.
Yeah, so for time tracking, there's obviously various ways you can input time within a project management tool like Teamwork. So you've got a Slack, you've got the task, you've got their extra apps. They've got a desktop app for Mac and Windows. So all that time just goes and be like grabbed and put into the task.
Yeah.
But when we're looking at what a customer's paying for on a monthly basis on their retainer,
Yeah.
then we need to allocate a certain amount of hours of time that we're going to be spending. So what we do is, what we did then is we analysed the time that people were spending, but we found that trying to pull that out on a single project within Teamwork was difficult because it's every single client that is currently on active tasks. So most people, I think, would probably use an individual project per customer, but we wanted to have a real consolidated view across the board, across every client, what is currently in progress and not have to switch around.
Okay, that's what was not Bridget. That's what I didn't get from this view. Okay, so to put it a different way, we're looking at a consolidated agency-wide board view versus
Correct.
a single client. Okay, so that's why this is so baller. Sorry. That's so cool. Okay. Totally neat. So why did you go with a Lambda script?
So we had a few guys that had some experience with Python, and the whole serverless architecture really made sense to me. The opportunity to pay for only when your code runs, and the visibility you get around logging and stuff made a lot of sense for me as a business owner at the time, and then trying to understand the cost implications of building out your automation. So automation itself is that there is a cost obviously involved with the setup, the maintenance, and then any compute or infrastructure that you've got underneath it, and the cost and even the free tier within AWS is quite generous.
So what's funny is that as I was building out my script that if we have time, I'll share at the end, I looked at Lambda and then I quickly was like, like it just, I was like, did you find that you kept in the free tier or did you bump over?
Yeah, so we're in the free tier for that one, but it really does depend on how you set your account up, and how often that particular Lambda is running.
Okay, got it. Okay.
So you build in 100 millisecond increments, so it's pretty good.
Okay, sweet.
Mm-hmm.
So do we need to refer to this slide before we go on to the tools?
No.
Is there anything that you want to go over?
That's that we tackled the different phases.
Okay, you were breaking up a little bit. So can I move forward? Dale?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you want to tell us, do you want to blow our minds away with this?
Yeah, so I guess what I started to get into once we started to talk about automation and build that into the agency was what other ways could we use data for our clients, and how could we separate ourselves within the industry and being something a little bit different. The agency world where we were was fairly commoditized, and we found that a lot of people were trying to compete on price only, and that we wanted to try and get out of the norm and focus less on the execution side, and then talk to clients more about the strategy side and how we could provide value there. So that got me sort of searching around for different tools. My programming background was over a decade ago, so I couldn't write code, and I still can't write code. So I started to look around for tools that would help me advance in using data without having to write code. So two tools that I found and got a lot of use out is Exploratory.io, which is a tool, basically a GUI for the programming language R, which allows you to apply a lot of mathematical models to your data and then keep a complete history of any of your data wrangling, which is like a data transformation process that you do. And then the AdWords querylanguage.me, which is a visual API query builder that you can set up schedules for, which I found super interesting. So I didn't have to set up a server or do any kind of complicated code. You could just, as long as you can sort of read which fields and which particular queries to make, you could get data directly back from the AdWords API.
Can you share with us an application using these two tools? I think we talked a little bit about a car dealership example that you guys drilled a ton of data into. Is that worth sharing?
Yeah, so one of the problems a lot of people were having was correlation between online activity and offline activity. And so what we tried to understand was how much of an effect was what we were doing from a tactical point of view, you know, adjusting bids and SEO strategy, content. How much were people being affected in their sales process for that offline activity? So we started to speak to the dealerships and say, okay, how do we get that information out? And then how do we then analyze that, those two different data sets? And so what we looked at was, could we do some trend analysis? Could we try and understand whether the overall effect of increasing website sessions was having an effect on car sales? And what part of that website? So if we spent extra money on Google Ads, if we spent money on Facebook, was that having an effect compared to offline activities like mail drops or outdoor advertising or radio? And so we started to put together a bit of a calendar of the activity that was going on, and then building up a trend analysis for what the yearly seasonality looks like for those businesses. And those particular companies, car dealers, run the same campaigns in the same time of month every year. It's not, doesn't really change too much. So we had a good foundation to be able to compare the website traffic seasonality with the sales activity. And we were digging through it, and we couldn't really find a correlation at all between increased online sessions and goals, and that includes form submissions to actual car sales. So we sort of looked around and looked at the data, and we actually found that there's a really good seasonal activity as to when people buy cars. So the online advertising that we were doing, and even the offline advertising that the other agencies involved were doing, weren't necessarily focused at the right point in time at when people were buying cars. So the way that we looked at it from a tactical standpoint was shifting budget from periods where we know people just aren't buying cars, which, as an example, end of financial year, a lot of people are buying at the end of the financial year, not at the start of the financial year. And so, because a lot of businesses are buying vehicles at that point in time, or that's when most people feel that car dealers have their biggest sales. So we actually then just, from a tactical standpoint, shifted budget out of certain parts of the year. So things like Christmas, New Year, and then after the end of financial year, and pushed it in to the end of financial year. And then that made a massive impact, because when people are searching for a deal during that peak period, we were far more visible because we had extra budget to compete with, with their competitors.
So one question that comes up is, for someone that wants to start off with this almost like predictive forecasting with seasonality, like, where do you get started? How much historical data do you actually need for you to be able to accurately predict something like this?
Yeah, great questions. I'm by no means a computer science guru. So what we have found is that a few years of data is great. Like, if you've got less than that, you obviously need to understand that the way that the algorithm works. So if we dive into this particular algorithm, so Profit is a open sourced predictive algorithm released by the core data science team from Facebook, widely used amongst the analysts and the data science community. This allows you to be able to get that in fairly few steps. There's probably, if you use a tool like exploratory.io, you could do this in probably 2 minutes. It doesn't take a lot of understanding. The advantage of exploratory.io that I found is that they have a connector within Google Analytics, and then you can start to play around with the data in there if you need to manipulate it. But these algorithms are adopted into a lot of tools, and anybody can now access these type of algorithms very, very easily.
Cool. That's really cool, because what I find really interesting is that you no longer need, or no longer necessarily need, a data warehouse to start crunching these numbers. You can, tap directly into Google Analytics or AdWords API and start crunching.
Yeah, and a lot of the data sets that are needed, they don't do a big data set, right? So the way the Profit works is that it takes a date time column and then it takes a metric column. So you don't need to pull in your whole Google Analytics account. You just need to have a date time series with a single metric. So if that metric could be Google Analytics goals, could be sessions, users, it really just could be any metric that you want to be able to forecast. So the advantage of this particular algorithm is that it gives you a yearly and weekly seasonality, as well as the predictive forecast. So the underlying algorithm, it's a regression algorithm. So it's an additive model. So it builds the yearly and weekly for you, and then that's how it comes up with that prediction. It takes into consideration things like missing data, and then what they call holidays. So one of the problems with predicting data is you have points in time that will affect your data. So if you have a public holiday, for example, if you had a big sale or you were closed during that time, that affects what it looks like from a forecasting point of view. And not only that, it's the fallout after that. So on Christmas Day, if you're closed on Christmas Day and then you've got Boxing Day and those days after, the algorithm learns that and it understands that there is not only on the first day, but the subsequent days on top of that.
We lost you for a second after Boxing Day. It just
Okay.
sounds like it
Yeah.
takes that into consideration.
Yeah. Yep. Sorry, I apologize. I don't know, this morning.
Can you remind us, because we were talking yesterday about the Gclick ID and how that was something that you needed to warehouse. Can you talk us through that? That was really fascinating.
So when you visit a website after clicking on a Google ad, you have the Gclick ID, the Gclick ID in the URL. That particular Gclick ID is able to be queried against the AdWords API, and then it's able to give you back all of the information around that particular click. So it'll tell you the campaign, it'll tell you the search network type, what the keyword was, a bunch of information. But it's only available for 90 days. So what the specific use case that we were looking at is that in general speak, Google Ads will give you a ability to say this particular campaign drove this particular goal, and these are the keywords that triggered it. But we wanted to bring that down to the individual user level. So we came up with a system where once the person landed on the website, we would use JavaScript to then pull the Gclick ID out of the URL, because it's obviously only on the landing page. And then if that individual was to identify themselves in some form, so logging in, a web form submission, we would then pass that Gclick ID into the form submission as a hidden field. And then we were able to then link the, so make the API call in the background as a separate process, and then join the data sets together. So then we get the individual user and then the individual user's search history of what ads they're clicking on, so what they're exposed to, and then make some determination against what they actually did versus their search term. So we could understand that the search term that a person is using shows intent, but their actions speak louder than that. And that's the bit that we wanted to understand, is that if we were putting certain budgets towards keywords, was that driving that service directly related to that keyword, or were people coming in off one particular search query and then converting on another service or product? And what we found is that some of the low CPC keywords were driving conversions. And so we looked at shifting budget away from some of the higher CPC keywords, and knowing that a lot of people are converting for the most profitable service or product for the clients off those side services. And that was a really good way to understand to the client that the way that we set the budget out is not just, you advertise X widget and then you sell X widget. You can advertise something else and then they end up, purchasing your most popular product, because that's normally what you get known for and what seems to be resonating with customers.
And I'm curious, how did you take into account the various attribution models that GA and Google Ads have into your model?
So we basically bypassed all that, and we didn't look at attribution in that sense, mainly because we could tie the individual user back to the search query. So we knew that it was biased in the sense that whatever attribution model we were using, ads is like, we're going to have a focus there because of the different models of last click or not. So we kind of knew that those people were probably, depending on their search or based upon whether they're looking for brand related terms or generic terms. So we could make some general assumptions there, but we left attribution to the side because the data that we had was more on an individual level and not necessarily channel focused.
Interesting. So how did you, I guess, take into consideration zero-click search results, within your model, I guess?
Well, so this analysis is really, at the end of the day, like a giant spreadsheet. So all it had was the CRM data on one side, and then we would match the query to the individual on the other. So there was a correlation that we tried to establish between which particular purchasers and customers versus what the actual sale was. So we then, we didn't necessarily create a model per se. It was really just a bunch of data analysis to have a look at the keywords that were driving the sales themselves.
Okay, so I want to reframe to make sure that I'm hearing you correctly. So let's say that we're doing a lead gen job. We drove the user with a Google ad to a page, the Gclick IDs in the URL string. We use JavaScript to grab it, add it to a hidden form field, which pushes the Gclick ID into the CRM, which is the unique ID that we can then join later, right? That's the magic. Okay.
Yep.
So you got to push it to the CRM in the first place. Okay,
yep.
Cool. I just want to make sure that for anyone who wasn't putting 2 and 2 together, they weren't hearing 3 or 5.
Yeah, and then you can use a tool like that, awql.me, to be able to schedule those API calls. So you don't need a developer. You don't necessarily need to get into the nitty-gritty of code to be able to get that data out. So you could just schedule that to be exported in a CSV once a week.
Jordan, I could see a real use for your clients for this type of technology. Sounds like you'd be chatting after.
I'm getting giddy about it. I like this a lot.
Yeah. So I was just telling Jordan to say, hey, say what Will Reynolds said. So when we were at MozCon last week, Will Reynolds was on stage, and his whole presentation was basically like, you people are a bunch of idiots, and you're all wasting hundreds of thousands of dollars of your client's ad spend. And what you really need to do is go after any search term that AdWords defines as a zero searches per month. Because he was seeing tons of conversions and no one else was targeting it. And that's kind of paralleled with what you're saying. And it's almost like you learn that by accident at some point, right? You're like, holy shit. And he had all kinds of cool things that he was sharing, but anything that we missed on this slide, the data exploration slide?
Yeah, so this is just a quick visualization of what the seasonality looks like from the algorithm. So this is from the Facebook profit algorithm. So as one of the, I guess, a byproduct of the forecasting is that they make available the weekly and yearly seasonality charts. So you can see for this individual customer on a yearly basis, they actually have 6-week sales cycles. So they have a new sale every single 6 weeks. So the peaks and troughs there relate to when the campaign launches, and then obviously as it goes on, it becomes less popular because the bulk of the messaging is always done at the start of the campaign. So this is using, as it says there, Google Analytics sessions. So this is what this customer's website traffic from a seasonality point of view looks like. And this was really good information for us to really understand about when people are visiting, and then you can overlay this with your sales data to really start to understand how the two correlate. If you are an online business, those two are going to be tightly coupled. But if you're an offline business, then applying that yearly seasonality over the website seasonality helps you to understand also some of the lengths of the buying cycle. So how long does it take someone from first visit over to actual sale, and when do people start to think about it? So you can make a fair few different assumptions from the data and then run some individual tests to help confirm those hypotheses.
When we were talking about the car dealership example yesterday, my brain went straight to, if everybody's sinking their budget into the time when the dealerships are the least profitable, i.e. they have their cars selling at the lowest prices, why don't we instead push budget to when they have the best margin? We didn't really get the answer to that question that I remember, but it sounds like from earlier today, I mean, would you say that the answer is you put the budget where the people are versus where the margin is?
I think that there's a little bit more to it than that. Like it's ideal that obviously if you could, but I think that you have to understand more about the buying behavior. And what I kind of learned in the data analysis of a lot of different customers was you really need to go back to the individual, like the marketing part of digital marketing. And I think that that's a part where a lot of people don't focus on. They don't understand a lot about consumer behavior and the way that people make purchases. And so it's very easy to get fixated by data and say, you know, put this here and do that, and then, you know, I'm going to have a big win. But there's a lot more complexity to the way that people actually purchase. And that's the bit that was kind of the missing piece to the puzzle. So I would say that ideally, yeah, if you could definitely do that as an experiment, but if it didn't work, then you need to go back to the drawing board. And that's the thing, is you need to run a test and then record that test and then be ruthless with the outcome and say either it worked or it didn't. And that's what I think customers really appreciated, is the fact that you're trying something different, you're giving the results, and then if it doesn't work, then you've got another idea, rather than just hoping that someday it's going to get better if I keep adding bit adjustments and, you know, keep releasing blog articles, hope that one day that's all going to pay off.
Yeah. Anomaly detection. This is one of my favorite things. I love to focus on this, and it all comes back to Dana DiTomaso scolding me at lunch last year, saying, I showed her one of my data studio reports, and she kind of chuckled at me. She's like, you know, this is kind of crappy. Like, this isn't a report. This is like internal. Like, there's reporting, and then there's like monitoring. And so anyway, I figured, I learned quickly that anomalies and monitoring have their place, and reporting is somewhere else. But can you share with us what your take is on anomaly detection and why it's important?
Yeah, so I found this important because we had faced what I think a lot of agencies have, where they have a goal that gets misconfigured, and then you've got no goal data. And so going back to the customer after 2 weeks and saying, hey, yeah, something happened to your Google Analytics and we've lost data, we don't have any tracking, I can't tell you how performance went. And then your whole report falls down because someone made some small mistake somewhere along the line. And we kind of looked at this as a way to try and give us back that peace of mind that as, you know, an agency scales, the ability to watch over metrics for each client diminishes rapidly. So I started to look at this and say, well, let's look at ways to monitor them, but do it in a smarter way. So a lot of systems out there will look at thresholds, and we tried a lot of different tools along the way to try and get that, you know, peace of mind back that in 3 in the morning has everything actually running the way it's supposed to be running. And the thresholds kept pinging, right? So we started to see that 2, 3, 4, 5 a.m., you're going to get alerts because that's when there's no traffic. And so then you get over alerted, and then you kind of just lose hope that, you know, that's actually working the way it's supposed to, because you get into this mindset that, oh, it's just another false positive. So we looked around at the algorithms that were available. Again, like, we're not data science gurus. We don't know how to build algorithms. We just want to apply those algorithms to the data. So Facebook Profit is an option, but its preference is basically built for prediction. So we looked elsewhere, and we found Twitter released a open source algorithm called the seasonal hybrid ESD for Anomaly. And as you can understand, these companies are throwing,
Can you start over? We lost you right when you said seasonal hybrid ESD.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't say anything after that. I saw the message. Yeah, these companies are throwing massive amounts of money and resources to build these algorithms. And so we just wanted to take advantage of that and say, well, let's use that and apply it to our data and see what happens. And the algorithms are very robust, and you can fine tune them. So these algorithms have inputs, and so they're called hyperparameters. and that allows you to adjust the way that the algorithm understands and interprets that data. And so you can start to get an understanding of how often you want to be alerted. So if you have a high profile client that you really want to be aware if dips happen or increases happen, then you might adjust up the sensitivity. But if you've got a client that you just kind of want to know that everything's sort of running, and then if something drops to the floor or it looks kind of odd, that you want to get alerted, you can back off some of the sensitivity and know that you're not necessarily going to action something straight away for that particular client anyway. And so we started with exploratory. This algorithm is supported within their tool. That's actually a screenshot from their tool. And we started to play around with that and work out, well, how can we use this in a more automated fashion? I never got to finish that within the agency, but I'm actually building this out within Jepto to be able to make this a lot easier. So you just simply, select the metric that you want. You can adjust the different hyperparameters. And then from the app side, we're just building Slack notifications, emails, and then in the UI, it populates these particular anomalies for you to take whatever action you need to.
I'm not really a fan of the negative alerts. I don't really appreciate those. Like when I'm not.
Yeah, I think you have to go through the pain first to appreciate them. So it's one of those things where if it goes wrong, you probably wish that you did care about it, and that's the point where it's too late. And that's the situation that we were in, is that we had an issue, and the client understandably grilled us for that particular mess up. So if we had that, the time to action changes completely. And if you're not getting alerted for those down periods or for the false positives, then that assurance that you're going to know when something goes wrong or goes right, like again, you can choose obviously how you want to be alerted, then I think that's a pretty powerful thing.
Yeah, I'm a massive fan. I think it's super cool. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've learned?
I learned a lot. I mean, obviously being within the industry for a little while sort of opened my eyes. It didn't show me everything because we were one company, and we did things the way that we thought, and having no agency experience prior to that was difficult for me to get my head around the way things were normally done and the way convention says it really should be done. But the main ones are like these buzzwords of machine learning, AI. You can probably throw blockchain or whatever else into that mix. There's, I think, a lack of understanding of how to apply those new technologies at a lower level. A lot of examples and talks at events focus on very niche edge cases that you can train things like a machine learning model to be able to recognize objects and self-driving cars, but it's not really relatable back to an individual agency and what they do in, day out, and it's kind of a pie in the sky dream. And I think that's where I'm trying to tackle that head on and say there is valid ways to apply this, and it doesn't take a data science team. It just takes a curious individual that wants to play around with it, and there's no real sort of shortcuts to learning it other than getting in there and starting to. So that's the first one, and it kind of touches on the second one. So everyone wants to do more. So I hear a lot of people going, yeah, I want to do this, I want to do that, but they don't have time. Clients don't want to pay for it. They're busy running their agency, and they don't want to be able to spend time on the weekends or personal time to be able to do this stuff. But it's coming. Whether we like it or not, the industry is going to be heavily affected by the way that these types of technologies are going to be applied. Obviously, Google's been on this for years in the way that their algorithms are optimizing your ads campaigns for you is showing that. And there's still a few people that want to run stuff manually. I think that's probably a wrong move in the long term. Trying to beat the amount of data that these companies have on individuals and buying behaviors. I think you're going to be, fighting a losing battle. And I think really the last point here is that I've spoken to a lot of agencies, building the tool and trying to get some direction for the tool, was that there's a lack of take up of data analysis. And that's really where I think a lot of value is going to be had, and where agencies can set themselves apart is to focus on what other people aren't necessarily doing. So everyone's focused on execution. Everyone's going, I can do my ads better than his ads. But, the main part is the strategy, and then how the data, not just the ads data, but the business data. So talking to customers about business goals and understanding more about them from a business sense, rather than just focusing solely in what happens inside the Google Ads interface. And I think that's really an important part for agencies as margins keep coming smaller and smaller, as well as, there's an overall shift towards client education as to why, why the fees that you're charging, should be charged. And they're definitely warranted. And if you provide value outside of just the execution, I think clients will love that.
What are your thoughts about the challenges to build a tool around establishing a true north metric for any client? How hard is that to build an algorithm around? Is that a problem you're trying to solve?
Not directly. I think that at the end of the day, you need to track something. I think there's a lot of companies that just don't track anything. I think that they don't set internal or external KPIs. So there's a lot of different, obviously, thoughts around and methodologies around how you come up with that metric. But the first one is tracking it. And then the second one is talking about that to the client and going, okay, we're seeing a positive increase in this particular KPI, and then matching their satisfaction. I think at the end of the day, if they're happy and that metric is going up, then you've chosen the right one. If you've chosen a metric where it's going up and your client's not happy, then you need to realign.
Right. So it's like realigning to their business goals.
Yeah, I mean, the expectation at the end of the day is that you meet a certain objective. So as long as you define that objective at the start with the client and say, this is how we're going to judge performance, this is how you should judge our performance, then you're both sharing a common goal for understanding what the output of your efforts are.
I guess I'm lucky in that revenue is just easy for me to focus on, and it aligns pretty well with what they care about.
Yeah, and I think most people do. I think a lot of people overcomplicate it. They want to know how many search queries enter the top 10 and all this other random stuff that doesn't affect the business. Like, it's good in the fact that things are moving forward, but businesses, they have cash flow issues, they have, bills to pay. They want to see that you're driving business effects and not just, fancy metrics across a dashboard somewhere.
Patrick had an interesting question. He said, I suppose I'm curious as to whether this type of automation can be integrated into the newer messenger bot technology.
Yeah, totally. I think that the messenger bot craze is far from over. There's a lot of learning still to do around NLP, natural language processing, and NLU, natural language understanding, to be able to get that intent. And that's where I think people are trying to understand not only what the individual's asking, but then the overused term of the 360 view of the customer, of how they make that personalized. And personalization is definitely an area where people are spending a lot of money, and they're seeing the benefits from it, and that's why they're spending the money in it.
Got it. It looks like we've got about 10 minutes left. It's not going to take me super long to show my teamwork automation, which I think is kind of the cherry on top. Jordan, what are your thoughts after all of this? I'm sure you've got some questions. Anything boiling up?
I have a lot of work to do now. I'm not sure if this was good or this was bad for my productivity, but we will find out over the next few weeks and months. But it's really interesting because, using machine learning, both on the predictive sense and for anomalies is something that I've been really interested in. And, I know you're working on that over at Jepto. So I'm quite interested to see how that pans out and how it can be, further incorporated into my practice. Because, I know for myself, there have been times in the past and even recently where, shit hits the fan and, rankings will drop or budget will go to zero for one day for no apparent reason. So being able to stay on top of these and take a proactive approach to this rather than like a reactive is going to be super important, not just like now, but especially in the future as agencies become more and more commoditized.
Yeah, and you want to be the one telling the customer that they've got an issue rather than them telling you.
Yes, that's exactly it.
Totally. So what do you think? Should we do the automation?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it.
So this one's pretty sick. So my little agency has a team. Our team came to me, and of course I can't spell very well. They looked at my task list inside Teamwork and they said, hey, we can't tell what the hell's due when. And there's deadlines and due dates right on the right-hand side of each task in the task list view. The task list view for people who don't use Teamwork looks like, oh boy, I guess I got to log in. It looks like this. It'll have like a task name. You can have more information. You can have a deadline. Anytime you see this little recurring thing, it tells you that it's due in future dates. The downside to this is that if I click this as complete and I refresh, the team member still sees the task, even though it says it's due August 9th or whatever. So they found that to be visually confusing. And my initial thought was, well, can't they see the deadline? And then I started to change my perspective as an agency owner. I said, well, I want to make their job as easy as possible. So we came up with a solution that does a couple different things. Number one, we wanted to improve the visual clarity inside Teamwork. We wanted people to know that when they marked a task as done, their task list got to be more and more empty over time, so that at the end of the month, their task lists are just plain clean and easy, and it'll be super easy. We wanted to automate the process of task list creation, and we wanted to automate the process of task assignments based on both the project category and the roles that are assigned inside each project and the team members that are assigned to those roles in advance. And I want to show you what I mean. So if I look at my project view, on the left-hand side, for people who use Teamwork all the time, they're used to seeing all of these project categories. Each one of those categories has an ID associated with it. And so we wanted to grab those categories, and we also wanted to grab the people who are assigned to each of those tasks. And so we do 3 different API calls. One is we grab a list of all of our projects that live inside of our SEO retainer list. And then we also grab all of the roles for each project and the user IDs associated with the role. We then do a post for each project that pushes to Teamwork's API, so it rebuilds a new task list based on the new month. And if I was to run it, it's a node-based app that lives on one of our servers, and we have a cron job that runs at midnight on the first day of every month. And so we've built some logging into it as well, so we can see if the task is running, and we can see if it's applying. And so if I let it run, This is just the command line or terminal inside a Mac. Right now, my whole script is running. It's making that first API call, the second, and right now we're watching it post, and it's building out all my new task lists. And when we go back into Teamwork and I refresh that client task list, what we're going to see is a task list associated with the current month name. So when it runs on August 1st, it's going to create a new task list that says August SEO tasks. And the dependencies are making sure that you have the categories set up inside Teamwork, the roles set up inside Teamwork, and then you reference both the categories and the roles when you're creating your post. Okay, cool. So when I refresh, we're going to see that I have a brand new monthly task list. And then we're also going to see that it's properly applied to the proper roles inside the project. And then after the fact, on the YouTube video, we'll put in the comments the link to this deck. And the deck has a video of me running the tool. And if you have questions about this, or if you use Teamwork in your agency and you're interested in having it kind of work for you instead of spending hours and hours, just reach out to me. I'd be stoked to help you with it. The bottom line is that if you're in an agency that has whatever, 100 accounts or 100 live projects or 200 projects, and you're the project manager, each month on the 1st, you have to pull in a new task list and you have to assign all the tasks. This runs in 10 seconds and does the work that took you hours and hours each month. I don't know. And I was kind of inspired by your script that you shared with us in BoardView. When you showed it to us in March, I was like, holy crap. And then we started to pull in team members and they started to complain about the view. And I was like, ugh, are you kidding me? Can't you see it's a recurring date? And then we pulled in more team people and they're like, hey, I hate this. Like, I can't tell when anything's due. You have everything is recurring. So it's totally confusing. I can't see when anything's due. And then I was like, and I knew it was going to take me a while to figure out the API calls. So there's a couple of things that I learned in the process of doing this. Number one, so whenever you're doing an automation project, it's like, what are the challenges? What's the proper execution? My mind went first to, oh, no problem. I'll just do an execution in Zapier. And I had problems with the node programming inside Zapier. So I abandoned that. And I figured what I would do is I'd build it all in vanilla JS. And then I would get as far as I could to make a node app out of it and then pull in my dev resource to help me with that piece of it, which is what I ended up doing. One of the things that I learned along the way, and this is how dumb I was about it, I built a vanilla JS code that lived on my website. And I figured, oh, no problem. I'll just post to it. And then I'll create something in my script that reacts to that post by firing the function. Well, that didn't work. And that's what made me build out a node-based server to do it. The other thing that I learned along the way, and this is something that we need to stress every single time we have a show, automations break. Automations break, automations break, automations break. And one thing that we ran into as we were doing this is that we ran up to Teamwork's rate limiting. You know, like we were hitting their API too fast. And so we had to make sure that we throttled the timing to make sure that we didn't get out of that problem. Did you have the same issue when you were building your thing with them?
Yeah.
And they're generous. I mean, you read the API docs and it's like, I don't remember what it is, 150 requests per second or something like that. So I don't understand how I was, because I was only hitting 10 projects, one API call to pull in all the projects, and then one API call per project, and then one post per project. And when you add those all up, that's less than 50 per second, because it took like 3 or 4 seconds for the whole script to run. So I think this is super useful. I know it's going to be super useful for my team. I feel like other people are probably going to want to do it. Jordan and I have talked about it. We're going to build out, or I'll probably build it because like Jordan's busy. I'm going to build out a long blog post about how to execute it step by step on our agencyautomators.com website. It'll be our first blog in the blog section, and I feel like this will be really useful for people. Dale, is this cool or is it a piece of dog poo?
No, it's definitely cool. I think the danger is that this stuff is addictive, and you need to be careful as to what you automate. I think the process for automation you guys have covered for what to automate is good, and I think that's a solid approach. And I think that you're right. Things break, things need to be maintained, and that you just need to consider how much time you're actually saving and what's important to you guys.
Yep, exactly. And you've been just an incredible supporter of our hangout, and it's been really cool to touch base with you after a lot of the episodes. And I always cringe, like if I feel like I didn't bring anything good to the show, I always cringe when I'm like, hey, did you watch the hangout? I'm like, oh God. But I'm glad that you've been a guest. This has been pretty amazing. Are we at that time?
We are at the time. Yep.
Okay. So for everyone who doesn't know, Dale isn't American. I know it's surprising. Not from South Carolina. He's actually from another country. It's called New Zealand. I'm just kidding. He's down in Australia, and he started with us today at 6 a.m., and he's the most impressive human being I've ever seen who hasn't had his coffee yet, right?
Yeah.
It's now 7 a.m. on a Saturday. So my hat's proverbially off to you. And I'm really excited for our automation our episode that's going to be in 2 weeks. What is that? Is that in August 4th, 5th, or 6th? What's the date?
That's 2 weeks from now. Actually, let me check. I should know this, but clearly I don't.
Well, as you're checking the date and the guest, if you can pull that up, because I should have had this. I felt like such a tool.
That it is on the 8th, and we will be having Sam Marsden from Deep Crawl.
Oh, he owes us big time because he bagged on the first episode. Well, the other thing of note is that I'm going to be in a public library in lovely Stanley, Idaho. And so if anybody, not that there are any listeners to this hangout or watchers who like fly fishing, if you want to come up to Stanley, Idaho with me and go fly fishing, it's pretty phenomenal up there. And as long as there aren't any forest fires within 40 miles, knock on wood, we'll have a grand old time. But I'll be in a public library with a bunch of sketchies over my shoulder, asking why I'm talking, and that's legitimately the only way to get good Wi-Fi within a 60-mile radius. So I'm really excited to join you then. Anything else, guys, that you want to share? Any last thoughts?
I think that's it.
Dale, amazing. I'm so stoked you were with us today. This was really
thanks for having me.
Yeah. Everybody, take care. See you in 2 weeks.
Take care, everyone. Thanks a ton, Dale.
Keep automating. We love it. Ciao.
See ya.